Jason, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Thanks, Dan. I am super excited to chat with you more and continue conversations like this.
Yeah, likewise. And we are both banana slugs, which is a fancy way of saying we both went to UC Santa Cruz. And I know from your bio that you studied marine biology, which is one of the coolest things you can do there because it's right on Monterey Bay, and it's probably one of the best places on earth to do that. So, how on earth did you go from marine bio to sales?
And I will say too, like going to that school for marine biology obviously was the purpose and the reason. It's a great location. It's also fascinating because one of the things that I did there in the clubs I joined was a scuba diving club. That's
Yeah.
like how much that it's a part of the culture. And used to go scuba diving as a club. Like, there's the Spanish club and the international club, and then there's the scuba diving club. Um, let's see, how did I get from there to here? Well, I spent several years tagging sharks and working on my degree. Literally couldn't get a job in marine biology without going for my master's or getting a master's because it was just so popular. Everyone wanted to work at SeaWorld and train dolphins and do all that kind of stuff. And I realized like I didn't feel passionate about it. I wasn't excited about it. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And then path winded around. I worked at Microsoft for a couple of years doing tech support. Then I ended up getting into my first sales job at 27, which I knew it was kind of sales, but I didn't view it as sales because it was helping people with mortgages. I also didn't receive any sales training. And that just kind of started me on this journey where I ran away from it a few times and went back and here I am.
Yeah, and I guess what was it that kept bringing you back? This is maybe the good question to ask to
You
sales.
know, after what I really realized and what I really enjoy is helping people. For the longest time, I resisted that. That's why I went into marine biology because I really just didn't want to deal with people. I would much rather deal with sharks than deal with people, and which is funny because most people are kind of the opposite. But I really shied away from that. And then when I started getting into sales and sales that was more helping people, so with a mortgage, and then I started helping people who were in foreclosure, helping people get out of debt. And then that felt good and felt fulfilling. And I didn't view it as sales. I realized it was sales and it was persuasion, but I didn't feel like I was selling people something they didn't need, like more crap that they don't really need in their life. And it felt like it was valuable and it was helpful. And then I got to the point where I was coaching and leading teams, and that was great because it just felt like I could impact them and help them be successful in their lives. So, yeah, every time I've come back to it.
Yeah, and I had kind of a similar experience being, in sort of a client service role and then realizing that, half of the job kind of doing both sides of the fence, half of it was sales. And I remember just that sort of like in the initial first weeks feeling like a sense of not like shame, but somewhere less than that. Like, I can't believe I'm in a sales job. I can't believe I'm a salesperson. And then eventually, that switched to something that I take a certain amount of pride in, something that I think is interesting. It's really a place for continual learning and so on and so forth. And I've been like that for the better part of a decade now. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think there's this sort of moment at the beginning where you're like, oh, I'm in a sales job?
It's because like literally all you got to do, and it's almost universal. It's almost like around the globe, but just say used car salesperson, right?
Yeah.
And then everyone has this perfect image. And you're in a generation where it wasn't that used car salesman doesn't mean much to us because it didn't affect us, but it's this thing that's handed down. I feel like from generation to generation, the short sleeve button up shirt with the tie, slick used car salesperson that's just trying to, take advantage of people. And that's not even fair. Like there's a lot of great used car salespeople who are professionals and they do great work. So it's
Yeah.
not even fair to their industry, but we all just have that. And again, I didn't have that experience. I've never dealt with a shady used car salesperson who ripped me off, but that's what everyone thinks. And so you get into sales and that's all you can think about is either that kind of persona and now you're that person, or that you maybe as a customer had an experience with a salesperson where you walked away from the transaction and felt instant buyer's remorse and regret. You're like, dang, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have bought it. They got me hyped up and now I wasted my money and my time. And then all of a sudden you're in that seat and you're that person now. That's what your brain's thinking.
Yeah, yeah. And with that in mind, so now once somebody's kind of gotten past those cliches and they're taking ownership over being in sales, I think one interesting question that you cover a lot in your book is why salespeople fail. So to put it to you, why do salespeople usually fail?
For me, what I have seen, it usually falls into two buckets. One is the training part, which I mentioned earlier. And I just realized this actually the other day. Like, this is so funny, is I realized that I have never received sales training. I have never gone to work at an organization where I went into the classroom and I received, or in the conference room or whatever, and received sales training. In anything I've ever done. I've had to learn it myself and figure it out. And in fact, I've started in organizations where there was no training. I had to figure out what the heck they were doing and then train others on how to do it, even if I hadn't done it yet. So part of it is the training. There's just no training like any other profession. If you want to be a doctor, there's a ton of training, ton of schooling, ton of practicing before you get to do that. In sales, like literally as a mortgage loan officer, one day I was not, the next day I was there, I was in a seat and I was helping people get into the largest debt of their life with zero training. Like, it was just all of a sudden instant. And then the other part is, and I mentioned this one, which is the order taker side, is that I think people kind of like yourself and myself, we have this bad experience. We have this bad idea of sales. And so people go to the other extreme and they don't want to be that person. So they become an order taker, which is they want to help people. They give people lots of information, but they don't do anything to proactively move the conversation towards the close.
Yeah, yeah, and there's so much to dig into there. I guess to talk about training first, how do you go about picking the right sales trainer for you or your employees or your organization? Like what sort of qualities or experience should you be looking for?
I think what you want to do, and this is for recruiting salespeople as well, just a little side note for your team, is that you want to find somebody who their style and how they would sell and how they train matches with what is being sold. Right. So, and this is always important. If it's a long sales cycle, you need a trainer or a coach or somebody who views that as a long sales cycle, long training cycle. They understand the depth of all that. If it's a short sales cycle, like I've worked in many one call close situations, that's a different person. If you get a trainer who's like views everything as enterprise and you put them into that, they're going to overtrain and it's going to be terrible. And so you got to find somebody who matches that, who fits that kind of the speed and it doesn't have to be industry specific experience, more just sales cycle length. And then also ticket price is important too. If you've only sold $500 things and all of a sudden you're going to sell $50 things, then that's a tough one to make that kind of a jump.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I'd love to get into hiring a little bit. I think that with our audience, like what we see a lot in the agency space is we're talking a lot of the times to an owner, and then one of their partners has been pretty much the only people closing business, and sometimes it's for the course of years or decades. It's been like that, and eventually they get to a place where their personal networks aren't doing it anymore, and they're thinking about hiring a salesperson. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard, yeah, we hired a guy, we gave him 6 months, we gave him a year, really didn't bring in anything at all. And I'm thinking maybe you made a bad hire. That definitely happens, or maybe you didn't support that person. So in the context of kind of this long sales cycle, in those situations, what's usually going wrong when somebody's hiring? You said lack of training, but I guess in terms of selection, in terms of the way that owners are thinking about hiring for sales, what are some of those common misconceptions that you're seeing or wrong ways of approaching the hiring process?
The answer to this is that it depends on where the company's at. So let's
Mhm.
use the example you said where there's owner, co-owner, one or two people started it. They're the number one salespeople. Maybe they're the only salespeople. They've tried, they failed, at hiring someone to take over the business. The problem is that kind of business owner might pick the wrong kind of people. What they need to pick is they need to pick someone who has the experience in creating the whole sales process. Because what will happen, and I have rarely found any owners that do it, is the owner's not going to build the system. They're not going to build the script. They're not going to build the process. They're not going to create training if they're bringing on one or two people. They're going to say, here's what I do. Listen to some calls, join me in some meetings, now go do it. And they're going to essentially completely abdicate the sales process to this new salesperson, which isn't bad if you pick somebody who's entrepreneurial minded enough as a salesperson, where they're going to build their own script, they're going to research it, they're going to create a system, but that takes an entrepreneurial person. Usually what happens is owners in those situations hire someone who has tons of experience. On paper, it looks like they have lots of experience. They've done well in the sales world, but they're a career salesperson that plugs into a system. They want to know what's being sold. They want to be held accountable. Maybe they need a script. They need a slide deck. They're not the ones who are going to make that, because that's not where their brain is. But the owner needs to hire somebody who's that entrepreneur person, right? Like someone who's just going to, okay, run with it and then figure it out and build it.
Right. That's really interesting. And basically there's so much more going on beyond just sales, like quote unquote sales, in the process of getting beyond a process that's built on referrals and built on the owner's networks. So I guess with that in mind, one question that I think we get a lot is, how do you start building that process from scratch? Like if you've sort of built up your company on referrals, and whether you're hiring this entrepreneurial person or you're saying I'm going to DIY building the system and testing it, how do you think about that? I think there's a lot of hand wringing over like, what materials do we need to develop? What should we plan for? Do we have one call and send this thing and then have another call? How do you set off on that path?
The first step and the best place to start that I've found is to reverse engineer what's working, right? So literally breaking down what's been done that has worked. And it's tough, especially if you're going to go from a referral in your own network to either cold outbound or campaigns to drive new inbound, where it's an inbound but it's still cold. They don't know you, they don't trust you yet, so you have to start somewhere versus a referral. And it's really about deconstructing and reverse engineering what's been working, taking calls, which is what I've done, taking owners' calls and then turning that into a script and then building a process around it and testing it, and then being very fluid. Because one of the things that I know is that an owner selling, they're passionate. It's their baby. Everyone thinks their baby is the best. Everyone loves their baby. They think it's the cutest. They think it's the most successful, right? Like, that's just the way we are. And then when you get somebody else in a sales seat, it's not their business. They'll never care about your business as much as you care about your business in sales, which is also just human nature, which is fine. But what you got to do is you also have to be careful not to just say, here's what I say, because when you say it as an owner, it's so much more powerful. There's energy, there's a status, there's a title that goes along with it. And then all of a sudden you give that to account executive John, and like they can't pull it off. So you also have to adjust on the fly.
Yeah. There's just so many intangibles. And I think that my company, when I failed at hiring for sales in the past, usually take most of the responsibility, or I try to, and I think that what I've always found hard, intangibles of like what's on them versus what's on me. Did I give them enough support? Did I give them enough training? Did I give them enough leads? And eventually I've gotten to the place with a couple different hires where I've just said, I don't know if it's you or me, but I can't keep doing this. Right. So how do you figure that out? How do you figure out if you've really made a bad hire, or the wrong person's in the wrong seat, et cetera, versus you just haven't given them the right support?
Usually the easiest thing is to look at the amount of support that's been given. Is there support? Is there training? Is there materials? Is there a script? And then is there accountability, metrics, coaching? Is there a performance improvement plan in place? Can you, at the end of the day, as a manager or as an owner, sit back and go, I've given them everything that I could, and like, if this isn't working out, it's not me. I couldn't have done anything else. I mean, you could always do more, but like, the diminishing returns part, like how much more am I going to go into this with somebody? And it's interesting because that's where I usually start with most of my clients, right? Most of my clients have sales teams that are failing at some level. They're not achieving the numbers they want. Some are terribly failing, and some are just doing okay, but not great. And the same speech I give to every team of salespeople who are worried when I come in that I'm just going to be the bringer of death, as I tell them, if you're not succeeding right now, they've brought me in because they know they don't have enough systems and support. It's not you, right? Management takes accountability for this, and we're going to build it up. And at some point, once we get everything structured and built and everything's in place, then it's going to be on you. If you're not winning, then then that's going to be you. Right. And so that's fair. I mean, I'm always a big one on taking responsibility. And, one thing I heard and I learned and I used even to this day is, if you have to fire somebody, then you failed as a manager or as an owner. That's just point blank. That's it. You either failed to support them and train them and guide them and coach them, or you failed because you shouldn't have hired them and they weren't a good fit. Now, when you're dealing with salespeople, it's tough because they'll sell the crap out of why they're so amazing in the interview, and then they'll get in the seat and then they won't necessarily perform, right? But because they're good at sales, so they're going to sell you. But you always got to take responsibility one way or the other.
Yeah. There's so much there. One thing that's really interesting is that catch-22, right? Because you want somebody that's going to effectively sell you in the interview, but at the same time, you could hire the wrong person. Do you find that balance?
I mean, that's the thing, and what it really takes is, if you've interviewed as many people as I have, you come to realize, like, you can see the little things that they do, and if they're going to be successful, the things that they say outside of the selling. Do they talk too much? They ask questions. Do they not ask a single question because they think they know it all? Because I guarantee whatever they do in your interview is what they're going to do when they sit in your seat. If they don't ask questions, when you put them on the phone, they're not going to ask questions. If they ask lots of questions and they're curious and they dig deep, that's what you're going to get. If they do long monologues where literally you're like, dude, stop talking. Like, let me get to my next question. That's what they're going to do on your sales calls. I promise and I guarantee. And the way to filter out if you've got somebody that you want or not is put them through the same paces of the timeline for your sales process that you would do. And then also make it hard for them. Right? Like, I even know somebody, they point blank say no to people that are perfectly qualified, that they absolutely want to hire hands down. They tell them no and reject them for this higher level sales position, because they want to see who says, no, I'm a good fit. You tell me how I can work there, because I really want to be a part of that team. Because guess what? Their pipeline's going to tell them no. Do you want somebody who just goes and runs off into the corner? Or do you want someone who's like, no, this is a good fit. You need to buy our service right now.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And there's a couple of different places we can go. I guess there's a little sidebar. You talk about scripts, and I think when a lot of people, they just tense up and say, no, I'm not going to read off a script. I'm a human. I'm selling something complex. What do you say to that?
I love it. Have you ever been to a Broadway play, seen a movie, watched a TV show, been to live theater? They all use scripts. And if you go to a Broadway play or live theater, and you go 3 times a day for the whole time it's running, it's the same, literally the same. They do the same. They stay in the same place. They say the same things. They're a professional. It's 100% scripted. And it's amazingly effective. I heard this from Victor Antonio. He had a YouTube video where he talked about that. And I played that for a team years ago. And they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? So the script is not the problem. The delivery is the problem, and the attitude of salespeople is the problem. Like, honestly, it's just this. Actors know, like, I have a script. Unless you're doing improv, you just want to make stuff up. But even Saturday Night Live is scripted, right? It seems like it's just improv jokes, but it's scripted in cue cards. And so it's the salesperson who thinks, just let me have a conversation. Let me be human. Like, this is what I do best. And I don't need a structure, man. Like, just let me do my thing, versus like, here's a script. And I'm not saying word for word, but any good salesperson ends up actually having a script in their head, and they say the same. Like, if you line up a top salesperson's like 10 phone calls, transcripts side by side, like, literally there's going to be chunks in there, monologues, where they say the same thing in the same exact way. So it's scripted, whether they're reading it or not.
Yeah, and that's what I found too, is that once I've gotten, whether I want there to be a script or not, there organically becomes one. So you might as well have one, so you could retrain others on. And I'd love to hear whether how much you agree with this, that when sales is done right, it becomes pretty rote and pretty boring, pretty repetitive, going through the motions. You're going through the same systems. So first, I'd love to hear whether or not you agree with that, and if so, how much is there a phenomenon of self-sabotage, right? Where you're like, I'm just bored to go off script to do this other thing to see if it works, and thus throw the train off the tracks. Because I feel like at different points I've done that.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, but I put you in a different bucket, and I'll explain why. I do think it becomes rote and repetitive when it's done right, like any professional would do anything, right? Like if we look at a doctor or someone like that who you see as a professional, they're doing the same thing. They go into the appointment, they examine the same way, they test the same things, they look at the same things. You look at a doctor who's a specialist, right? Like let's say they do knee replacements. That's all they do all day. It's very systematic. It's very repetitive. It's the same ish in this kind of like narrow thing, but they do it at a very high level. And so I've seen a lot of salespeople where I'm sitting there and I'm listening to them, and it's the same conversation over and over again, but they've perfected it and they get the results and they know that's a vehicle and they love what they do. So they're okay with that. Then there's the other end, which is more people like yourself. And the reason why I say you're different is because you're an entrepreneur and a business owner, and you're that kind of person that's tweaking and changing. And is there a better way, or can I find a different way? And so that kind of person in a sales seat is dangerous, because if they're sitting there, they're going to be trying different things. And here's why I say they're dangerous, because they might find something that works, but they can't repeat it because they don't know what they did, because they're just trying random stuff. And that's where it gets difficult, because normal, like most salespeople, what happens is it's not that they're experimenting and they're bored, it's that they're inconsistent and they fall off the script, and then things stop working. And the one thing I've always done, literally with a physical script, is I pull it out of their drawer, because it's usually hidden under all their food and snacks and all the crap. And I literally hand it back to them and say, follow the script and get out of your slump. And then instantly they close deals, because they stop over talking, they stop over explaining, they stop thinking they know everything, and they literally just get back onto what worked.
Yeah, and I think that when you have a script like that, and you have certain questions you're supposed to ask, there is a certain amount of courage that goes into it in the beginning, and it sort of feels like almost like a trust fall, where you're like, I need to ask this big dumb question and just let it hang, Yeah. So I guess to shift gears a little bit, one thing that I'm sure our audience is thinking of is they're selling complex marketing services. Maybe they're building giant websites or apps, and they get somebody on the phone, and the person says, you've done good work. We could work together in the future. They have a nice brainstorm, and then it sort of fades. How do you think about selling not just a longer sales cycle or a complex offer, but something where it might be a big project base, where you can't exactly just ordain that this person's going to want to build a website or whatever it is? And it's how should you go about kind of thinking about that long road where you can't just make a sale happen out of thin air?
Yeah, I mean, and so here's the thing. I mean, I think I view every sales situation as a long-term relationship where I want the best for them, and I want them to leave happy and satisfied with what they purchase, right? Obviously, you want very satisfied, you want raving fans, but I mean like the buyer's remorse level at 2 o'clock in the morning the next day is very minimal. And I even, like in the book, I talk about how to mitigate that so that it doesn't happen, but it just happens. It's human nature. So I want that to happen, whether it's a short one call close sales cycle, or it's the long stuff you're talking about, right? I mean, I've done some 12 and 18 months transactional type of sales where it's just like, you're basically dating on the way to getting married to this person. You're just talking so often and so much. And that's the challenge for a lot of salespeople, is they aren't that relational. Like I actually mean like from a relational committed, like they want to be in a relationship with somebody that long type of thing. And they're not thinking that, right? They're more transactional in the moment, short sales cycle, not long one. So that's part of the selection process. But I mean, I view all of it the same. Like with the relational, I want the best for them. And if it's going to take a while for us to get to that point, then that fits well for me and what I coach.
Right. So I guess on the relational front, can you shed more light on that? When I think a lot of times people are worried about, like, how do I keep in touch in a way that's relevant, in a way that's useful, but also can move, our forward and allow them to buy from us so we can help them even more. Are there any, tangible things that you've done with clients or anything? Maybe also ways that this is approached wrong, that you see in terms of the relational sales over a longer time horizon?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts in the beginning. So if you're starting this sales cycle with a conversation, then it is imperative, and you will be it will be very hard to win long term if you cannot uncover as quickly as possible the deepest reason why someone needs your product or service. Now, I'm assuming it's a good fit, like they qualify, right? So you've done the pre-qualification, you know it's a good fit. You're using your discovery questions and you're going as deep as you can, and they will let you to uncover that. And I'm talking like if you have a 12-month sales cycle, that's totally fine. But on that first call, you need to go as deep as possible, because you must know the answer to that question, which is, why do they need what you have to offer? Like, how does it help them achieve their goal, help their business, help their life, avoid pain, get them out of a bad situation, whatever it is, like for pain, or, avoid pain, or for gain, whichever side. You need to know the answer to that, because if you don't know the answer to that question, then they probably don't know the answer, and you're hoping that they do, and you're hoping they'll know why they want to buy, which is where order takers usually come in, which is, I'm hoping you know why you need a website, or why you need to join the gym, or why you need to, buy this thing, and you're just hoping they know. If you know, then what you do is you bring that up in the conversations down the road, in your follow-up, in your messages, in your emails, in the stuff that you send them, which is, hey, Bob, when we talked, I know you said that the website was going to be super important for your business to help you grow so that you could retire someday. I thought this article would be very helpful for you, right? It now becomes the transition and the reason why you're following up in your voicemails. Hey, Bob, I know that you said the website. I know you said this traffic. I know you said this SEO strat, whatever it is. I know you said this was super important. I'm just following up. Would love to get your feedback. Let me know what you're thinking about the project. Let me know when you have
Yeah, yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And in that regard, I think there's a lot of hand wringing that goes on with that post call nurturing or post call follow up. And there's a lot of debate over like how much of this can be automated, how much of this can we get a giant marketing automation platform to just send out articles for us when somebody else on the team just nurtures these people, versus how much of it needs to come from the first person in a non-automated one-to-one way. So I'd love to hear your thought. What is that fine line between marketing and sales and automation and all that stuff?
I think if you can put your prospective buyers into very strategic buckets as far as their needs and wants, right? So if we're talking about that scenario there that I had with Bob, then can you tag that person or put that person in your automation software, in your CRM, in such a way where whatever content they're going to get in an automated nurture follow-up campaign is specific to Bob's situation, right? So it's Bob's situation. He has this goal versus Karen, who has this goal. Then the content is specific. If I just send Bob whatever is in my automation system and whatever white paper I think applies to everybody, then you're just shooting in the dark and you're just hoping, and it'll probably do more harm than good. So I think it's about how specific. If you can be really specific, then you can use more automation and less, manual stuff.
Yeah, and that's something we a lot, is the importance of special and easier. And I think that's kind of the foundation of everything before you can get to solving the problems you solving sales problems and so on from there. One thing you talk about in your book that's interesting is the follow-up trap. Can you explain what that is and how you can hopefully stay out of it?
Yeah. So the follow-up trap is usually what happens to most people's pipelines in sales, which is they're just chasing people and they're following up and, leaving messages. People are gone. People are ghosting them, which is the term taken from like the dating world and now, apply it to the sales world, which is just, they're gone. They're absolutely disappeared, and you're just chasing and you're following up without results. And the biggest thing, which is actually, what I was touching on a few minutes ago, is that if you don't know why they should buy, why they need to buy, why there's value and impact for them, then your follow-up pipeline is pretty much garbage. It's pretty much just hopes. Like you're just hoping that someone's going to hear it and the timing's going to be right. So the best way to avoid the follow-up trap is to know the answer to that question of like, why do they want to buy? And then your follow-ups are very specific. And to avoid the follow-up trap as well, it's about setting clear expectations and intentions of what's happening next. I mean, one of the problems is a lot of people end up in the follow-up trap and in somebody's pipeline because they told the sales rep, hey, send me more information and I'll check it out, right? Or I need to think about it. And most of the time, those are just nice, pleasant brush offs where the prospect really just wants to tell you to go away and never call them again. And they don't want to buy from you, but they're trying to be nice. And so they say, send me more information, send me an email, and then I'll look at it and I'll get back to you. And so the sales rep says, hey, that's great. That's awesome. They want information and then they're going to buy. And what you don't hear is the fact that it's just a big go away. And then they end up in this nurture thing for forever.
Yeah. With our clients, there will be a series of conversations, and there actually will be a budget or project, and then we'll fizzle out, and then you'll never hear from people again until you do the thing where you say, hey, I'm going to take this off of our radar. Just want to, and so then there's this loss aversion thing that happens. Can you talk about the best way to handle that? I think what creates a lot of are we doing this too early? Are we rushing them? At what point do we put the risk on them to give us?
To me, it all comes down to what expectation you set, right? Is it, I'm going to send you more information, then I'm going to follow up with you next week. Let's talk next week. And then they blow off that call. And then it's been another couple of weeks. And you're just like, okay, do you really want to do this? Or did you set no expectations, which is, okay, I'll send you an email. Just let me know when you want to talk again. And then it's out in this vagueness. And then that's a tough one to know when you kill that. But yeah, I mean, I think that kind of takeaway works well. The thing is, though, is you have to actually mean it. And then you have to actually stop following up, right? So that you're in integrity with yourself and that you mean it with them. And when you do that, that's always a tough one. It really just depends on how much has happened when they said they were going to make a decision, and then how far past that point is relative to your sales cycle, right? They said they were going to make a decision in July, and it's now, September, October, November. It's like, okay, but do they have a budget thing? And that it's a budget issue. Do you give them more time? So, but at some point you just want to stop chasing them.
Yeah, there's obviously judgment calls. And I think one thing that has been super helpful for me is kind of the realization that the only thing that controls my time, in the sales process. So I'd love to hear what you agree, how.
Yeah. And I think for the time thing, I mean, you can control your time. You can do the outreach, for those kind of short outreaches and voicemails and emails, there's, enough time for you to do those and nurture those things and move them forward, depending on the size of your pipeline. And there's also a point at which you're just chasing somebody and you're just desperate, like somebody who is trying to court or date somebody else, and they just keep calling and trying to get, a date with somebody. And at some point it's just desperate and sad, right? You got to make sure, if you're valuable, if you're the one that has value and you will benefit the other person, there's a balance where you shouldn't be begging them or chasing them to buy from you, right? Because here's what I know as well. If you do get them back on board, I promise they will not be a good client. Because if they weren't the one moving the relationship forward, and you're kind of begging them and chasing them and tricking them, and hey, we're doing a special here for the end of the quarter, and if you come on board, I'll give you 50% off. Boom, you get them in the boat. I promise you won't want them. They will not necessarily be a good client because they own you now and they know it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And on that note, I think that a lot of Q3 and going on, and one thing that you write about in your book, and that the giants that we all reference, like Zig Ziglar and so on, talk about, is the idea of abundance, and so on. I was just wondering, what exercise have you found to be in the face of scarcity?
I mean, I think the best thing is to look at the fact that there's 8 billion people in the world, and how many of them do you need to buy from you? And then what I've always done with salespeople and organization is figure out what is that? And, the term is the total addressable market. So how many people are in your total addressable market? How many people do you need as customers for your company? What percentage is that? like lifetime percentage. And then how many do you need to close in a given quarter, month, week, day? I mean, you know, I've done sales cycles where like the goal is to close 2 deals a day. It's mostly inbound. It's mostly one call close, helping people get out of debt. It's 2 deals per day. And at that time, it was helping people with credit card debt. And there was 150 million people with credit card debt. And it's like, okay, each sales rep would say, well, how do I know? Is there going to be enough deals and leads and business? You got to go close 2. And you do the math on that. And even on the daily closing rate, it's ridiculously small. And that just puts it in perspective, right? That's the same thing I tell people all the time. It's like 8 billion people on the planet. How many do you need as customers? Right?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good way to contextualize it. And the other thing is just kind of looking back on the past wins and the fact that, you know, unless you're brand new, which is a different story, you've probably already had some wins that you can think about and reference and reverse engineer, you know, so that makes a lot of sense.
Jason, and I think really the key is putting in those activities all the time and doing the work and, you know, doing the sales activities, the outreach, the nurturing, all of those things. And at some point, determining what your success formula looks like, your sales success formula, which is this many outreaches equals this many phone calls, which equals this many, you know, let's say proposals, which equals this many, you know, closed new clients. And then that way you can trust in the abundance versus the scarcity that if I do these 50 outreaches a day, I will close deals, right? Like I will, I just know I will.
Yeah, and that's been huge for us and for a lot of our clients as well, is just be able to actually count the no's that you need to get a yes. You know, you can kind of flip it on its head. So, Jason, this has been really useful. I think this is going to help out a lot of people out there. How can people get in touch with you?
So 2 ways. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to chat with me, find me on LinkedIn. I do a lot of posts there. And then I have a central hub. If you go to jasoncutter.com, that's cutter.com. I have links there for everything I have going on. The book, my podcast, the consulting side, coaching side, they can find it all there.
Awesome. Thanks again, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan.